Less than 10 years ago, to be precise, 8 years ago, the Knight Foundation embarked on a journey to accompany Miami in its quest to become a global hub for innovation and high growth entrepreneurship. Miami has been better ever since. The Knight has invested tens of millions of dollars into supporting Miami-based initiatives like Lab Miami, MDCC's Idea Center, Black Tech Week, Emerge, America's Conference, which in reality is Emerge America's Conference, Endeavor Miami, 500 startups, Miami Angels, and Babson College's WIN Lab. Raul Moas joined Knight Foundation as Miami's program director in March of 2018. Prior to joining Knight, Moas served as the managing director of Miami Angels, Florida's largest angel investor collective, which brings together exceptional entrepreneurs and accredited investors to fuel success. Raul is passionate about Greater Miami and deeply involved in making its community a better place. And today, Raul Moas is with us here at Aquí y Ahora, podcast created by PAG.law specialists in venture capital operating across the hemisphere for a conversation with Juan Pablo Cappello, the founding partner of PAG.law. Both are welcome with us today. Welcome.
Raul, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, man.
Well, hey, everyone wants to know, Knight Foundation, What are you guys up to? For the people who don't know, and the podcast, we have a sort of intro. So they've heard in the intro, but I think we can all say that what's happened in South Florida's tech scene in the last 8, 9, 10 years is in great part thanks to the work that the Knight Foundation and now Raul is doing. So first off, thanks on behalf of the whole ecosystem.
So it's incredibly generous. I appreciate that. I want to say thank you to you. You were here way before I was, and you were actually part of Knight's kind of advisory committee when we got started on this whole thing. So you've been kind of an integral part of it from the very beginning. All is well, thankfully, on our end. The foundation is kind of, in general, works in 26 communities across the country. So working remote is kind of part of the ethos to begin with. But all in all, man, we're really kind of, I think, doing two things. The first thing is making sure that our communities and our grantees and the organizations and folks that we've been working with for years now, that they're doing well. Physically, safety-wise, family-wise, health-wise are well, and that as they kind of think of how their organizations and their work adapts in this kind of uncertainty, that we're able to meet them where they're at and figure out what that might be, right? And so it might be taking some funding that was designated for a project and repurposing it for general operating costs, or adapting what was going to be an in-person kind of event or production to a digital one, things like that. And the second thing that we're really focused on is seeking out opportunity. And that's generally the mantra and the orientation. I think we believe that even in these times, right, incredible uncertainty, incredible kind of chaos in the grand scheme of things in terms of markets and people and society, there's opportunity, right? There's opportunity to be had. And there's opportunity to advance our strategies in and of themselves. And so in Miami, we've been focused a lot on startups, obviously, but really even more specifically on creating a tight-knit community of founders. We think that's critical to the success, the health of the overall ecosystem. If you have founders that know each other and support each other through peer learning, peer mentorship, that's really, really critical. And so there's still ways to do that. They may look different than it did 3, 4, 5 months ago, but there's still opportunity to advance that cause.
Yeah, no, one thing, I've really admired about the Knight Foundation, I remember in Detroit when the city went bankrupt and there was a moment where the creditors were threatening to take over the museum, and the Knight Foundation, with I think another institution, sort of bravely stepped in and bought the art, or I don't know, put tens of millions of dollars to work to sort of, step into that void. Yeah, I mean, I guess specifically, with the Knight Foundation, supporting connected communities through this tech and innovation and entrepreneurship initiative that you've been heading up. Specifically, you mentioned that things may look different. I mean, how are things beginning to look different? And what have you been seeing that the organizations that you guys are supporting on the ground locally here in Miami, how are they pivoting and how are you guys supporting those pivots?
Yeah. So obviously a lot of things are remote and digital these days. I think actually that's going to stick around, at least in our neck of the woods. And so a lot of the organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs, Endeavor, 500 Startups, Venture Cafe, that had a lot of either obviously had offices or had a lot of in-person kind of contact, I think they've realized in some ways, hey, not only are we kind of surviving this, but we're actually doing well in some unexpected ways. And so I'm not sure if folks will return to the office. I think there's a cost savings in having a small I think folks will think about that. And then when they do start kind of going back in person, I think there's like ways that you can kind of shared common space, shared event space that in between cycles, in between events, you can sanitize and take care of. So I think just the way that we work, at least in this realm, is going to shift. The other piece I think that's changing a bit, and I think just at the very beginning, I think we're still at the very beginning of whatever this is, right? Whatever transformation changes happening in society, we're at the beginning still, it's beginning few chapters. I think a lot of folks are kind of watching, right? We're really carefully watching what happens if you increasingly decouple geography and kind of your profession. And so there's a lot of talk about folks being remote now and being more remote than before, different levels of kind of working remote. And some companies have made some splashes about it. Some others, like Facebook, have said you can be remote, but we're going to adjust your wages accordingly. And we'll see who kind of if that sets the benchmark or not. But in general, what happens to the kind of the talent market when folks can say, you know what, if I'm gonna be quarantined or I'm gonna be kind of having to deal with social distancing or social kind of precautions, then I'd rather do it in a place like Miami where there's a different quality of life, there's more private green space or whatever it might be, and do that than maybe SF or New York. And so I think a lot of us are keeping a really close eye on, all right, is there a shift? We're already attracting a really good number of folks, especially kind of along the 95 corridor. The New York-Miami route was an increasingly popular one. Does that change? Are there more folks coming down? Are there more folks choosing to be here? And when they are here, investors, talent, founders, are they building, right? How do we welcome them to community? How do we make sure that Miami isn't just kind of a temporal kind of stop or layover, but rather they can plant roots and make this place home and then build, right? They can invest their time, the resources in building out the market.
And what kind of initiatives are you guys creating to get those people connected?
There's a few. I think so. We had already started supporting kind of a tranche of kind of portfolio of endeavors that aimed at doing that. So Alison Luparsky had something called Just Dinner that she got together about a year and a half ago now, and it really is just dinner, right? There's no selling, no pitching. It's 8 people, really well curated, so that there's kind of symmetry and kind of complementary kind of elements to it. But it's 8 people just getting together to get to know each other. And the cool takeaway from the ones that I participated in and overall was that people came out of that dinner, out of that experience, and said, oh, wow, I didn't realize there were other people like me who were building ventures, who wanted to invest in companies, whatever it might be, in Miami. And so kind of, I think Allison discovered that because it's so young here and the city's so big and so kind of disparate in all its parts, it's easy not to find other people, or rather it's hard to find other people who are building in the same way you are, right? The density might not be there. The kind of square footage is so big that we're all scattered throughout. And so Allison was like stitching together this awesome community of folks that were building cool companies, investing in cool companies, all that good stuff. That is going to, I think, take on a different air in its approach. We may not have dinners for a bit, look different, but you can still kind of serve as that welcome committee when somebody comes to town, right? You can still kind of almost try to, if you think about it, it's kind of a rapid onboarding. We're trying to kind of get somebody who's new to the city and new to the community and give you social capital much faster than if you were kind of to be on your own for 18 months. Will Weinrod, who we were chatting about before this, called LLC, it's a group of forum, right? It's a founders kind of forum. Same concept, right? He was building really intimate, high trust, high fidelity communities of peers. And so I think those kinds of activities will continue. Actually, they'll thrive. I think people are really hungry for community. They're really hungry to find peers to just talk with and decompress with and help them navigate the craziness that's happening. How it happens tactically, physically versus digitally, TBD. But I think we'll see a lot more of those kinds of opportunities, that kind of productized trust or productized community or productized social capital, kind of booming in the next few months and years.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting what you're saying. It's funny about the dinners. I was, there's a few people, who come from the tech world here in South Florida without dropping names, but that, you don't realize that, they're top 20, top 50 sort of, people in tech. And one of those people is funny. I've gotten to know quite well. And he was, he's doing, like these Zoom dinners. And it's very interesting. And, sometimes they'll even have if we're having dinner afterwards, he like fake eats, like he has a plate of food and sits along. But yeah, I just thought this concept of Zoom, it is, that Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. These have gotten pretty fucking interesting pretty fast. And if you had told me 3 months ago, I'd be, seriously contemplating a Zoom dinner. And it wasn't that I was in jail. I would have been shocked. I would have been shocked if somebody had told me I would have watched, Tiger King as well on Netflix, which probably would have been something I would have not done, 3 months ago.
That's a whole other conversation on Tiger King. Dude, so the cool thing is like we're seeing some companies kind of adapt, or the food and beverage folks adapt.
Right.
Like Grams and Winwood started selling kind of cocktail kits, right? And so you could have cocktails and drinks with your friends because they were going to deliver your Grams cocktail kit to your house, right? So little things like that I think are interesting. I think wild in terms of how it works, and that we got here to your point. Like nobody, this was not when we were planning scenario planning at the foundation for the next few years. Like nobody kind of put on the threats kind of category. Global pandemic shuts everything down. That said, man, I think we're looking for the silver lining of it.
Yeah.
I think there's absolutely a recycling of talent that's going to be happening at an accelerated pace. And that's, I think, good. And so I think the question for us is, all right, like we're long-term investors. We're bullish on Miami, on the net. And the question for us in terms of what we're watching and all that kind of stuff is going to be, does the talent continue to choose to be here? Does the quality of life in Miami continue to kind of overrepresent and kind of be above the rest as it relates to kind of some of the other larger metro areas? If that's true, right, then the capital markets will work themselves out, right?
Right.
If you believe that this isn't kind of the apocalypse,
right?
Capital markets in due course will work themselves out. Then, all right, that's something we can't entirely control. Maybe we don't invest as much time and resources into activating that capital in Miami. But man, there's a ton to be done, a ton of opportunity to be had in building community, whether that's through virtual drinks, virtual dinners, Zoom dinners, and in making sure that the folks that are choosing to be here, that are moving here, find their tribe a lot faster than if kind of they were to be left up to their own device. So I think that's kind of when one door kind of closes, the other one opens. And for us, it still orients us. It's still kind of pushing in the same direction of helping build a better place where founders can succeed. That's like the core of it. Can we build a Miami where amazing founders build amazing globally relevant products? If we can build that infrastructure, that hard infrastructure and that soft infrastructure, right? The mentorship and the accelerators and the funding networks and that kind of stuff, that's harder. And the social element, the soft infrastructure, I think we're in a really good place.
No, I agree. It's interesting. Refresh Miami, which is an organization you guys have supported for a long time. They came out with a report with Nancy Dahlberg in January, February about sort of the year in review of Miami Tech. And it's almost, I think this happens other than in the real estate business where, they believe they're amazing and defy the laws of gravity. But I think, in tech, we don't realize just how far we've come. Last year there was $2.3+ billion worth of investment in venture in South Florida, which is more than Austin, which is more than Washington, D.C. Important metro markets. And I think that put us seventh sort of in the United States as a I don't know if the word would be tech hub, but, at least a place with a very active sort of tech culture. Obviously, that's, in great part thanks to you guys. How do you sort of see things playing out? I totally agree that, now's we just got to let things shake out. And, what I'm trying to do is make a lot of small bets and, stay agile and, that sort of Darwinian, that it isn't really the strongest that survive. It's the most adaptable. So the way to stay adaptable is obviously, try to iterate and iterate and iterate, almost like the lean launch philosophy. I mean, how do you think things, without making, specific, remote or whatever? I mean, sort of where do you think Miami tech goes from here? It's obviously had a significant, sort of steady growth. It's obviously accomplished a huge amount. And, I know part of your mission at the Knight is really sort of thinking, where does this ecosystem go in the next sort of 2 to 5 years? What are you guys thinking about there?
Totally. I think there's a couple of things. Just like when as we're trying to assess the health, right, of the market and the health of the community and the health of the ecosystem, I think we're cognizant that the trains arrive at the station at different times. And so kind of when we're assessing kind of capital markets and funding, venture funding is going to seize up and lock up a lot faster, near instantaneous,
right,
in terms of when the crisis kind of hit, compared to when a company and companies might fold, right? So companies will run out of cash for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And so we'll see kind of that recycling of talent and experience happen over a longer period of time than kind of what we saw in a really short period of time. So there's going to be a really deep plunge in capital activity in the market. Whereas the companies that survive and adapt are able to go further and for longer, and the ones that aren't able to do so for whatever reason, they'll kind of fall along the path, right? So the next kind of year or so, I think we'll see that recycling happen. So I think just being cognizant, like just because capital markets kind of seized up and contracted for a period of time, it doesn't mean that the whole market's not viable. It doesn't mean that the community isn't there anymore. It just means that the macroeconomic conditions got really tough. So I think we're paying attention to that and looking for indicators of tailwinds versus headwinds over the next couple of years. If in the recovery over the next 2 years, Miami venture financing, right, the amount of capital either is coming from the market or coming to the market, doesn't kind of pick up back to like 18, 17 levels, then maybe there's a fundamental thing that's off. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's quite the opposite. I'm really bullish on this. I think it's incredibly unfortunate, and with all due reverence for the human tragedy, the loss of life, the loss of livelihoods, right? If we can acknowledge that is a tragedy that is beyond kind of comparison or beyond expectation or beyond reason, honestly, in this country in particular, right? That this country has allowed things to get to this point. If we can just recognize that and then kind of look at it from another angle, I think the other angle is, all right, we got to build forward, right? We can't be stuck in this in this moment. We have to learn to mourn at the same time that we learn to rebuild and that we learn to build forward. So the Titanic will sink for a very long period of time, and we'll continue to mourn our community, our friends, our family. Unfortunately, as we also say, all right, we have to rebuild. We have to build forward. And when I think of building forward, man, I think that we have a really strong kind of positioning. We're really, compared to 5 years ago, even just 5 years ago, and to your point, man, how quickly things changed. Dude, 5 years ago, I don't think folks thought of Miami the way they do now, right? The cultural depth, the cultural relevance, the maturity of certain things here. People now kind of stumble on Miami and they're like, oh, wow, this is actually cool. Or, wow, this is interesting, right? And that's Miamiites, that lifelong Miamians that are like, oh, I didn't realize this was like right next door to where I live.
Exactly.
Or newcomers who are discovering this place for the first time. I think that kind of fundamental element of the city, because we've invested as a community, we've invested in arts and culture, we've invested in different things like that. That holds, right? And that continues to attract an awesome talent base and an investor class that wants to be in that kind of global multicultural environment. They want to be in a cosmopolitan global city. And Miami can offer that. It's, I think, one of the few places in the country that can really offer that. And so I'm bullish, man. I think Miami tech and Miami startup ecosystem continues to kind of grow. There'll be some dips. There's going to be a lot of churn in terms of companies. But I think that the city in and of itself is still a really attractive value proposition for a lot of folks. And so I think a lot of folks are going to choose to stay here because of lives and livelihoods and quality of life, and the kids are in school and they enjoy it, all that kind of stuff, and we can raise a family having a good time here, and in a relatively cost-effective way compared to other kind of big tech hubs. I think that's kind of the biggest draw, and that continues to be the biggest reason why we'll continue to attract awesome folks.
And one thing you guys have been focused on for quite a number of years is sort of having Miami is an incredibly diverse city, right? I mean, the statistics I've seen, it's something like 2.8 million people and 2.2 million Hispanics, broadly defined, right?
Yeah.
you guys have been all about diversity, inclusion, sort of not just trying to sort of measure the success of the initiative in terms of dollars invested or, number of unicorns coming out of South Florida, but really trying to, and I've respected that. I mean, how is that thinking today? And is that some, a focus that you guys are doubling down on going forward?
Absolutely, like without a doubt. And it's there's, I think, ethical and moral reasons for it, right? And there's also just practical, common sense business reasons for it. Like what we build can't be, if at the end of this whole experience, right, when Knight eventually kind of changes course and invests in something else in the city of Miami, if what we ended up building and supporting, we built with community, did not look like community, did not look like all the parts of Miami, then I don't think we did a good enough job, right? And we also left opportunity on the table, meaning that there's awesome people building awesome companies and investing in great companies in different pockets of the city. Miami doesn't stop kind of at 95. There is a Miami west of 95. There's also Miami west of the Palmetto, right? Lo and behold, and even beyond the Turnpike. And so this, I think there's a couple of diversities that we're talking about. I think there's diversity in terms of the different kind of cultural and racial and ethnic communities in Miami. Really much, I think of it as a mosaic with really kind of clear grout lines. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, there's a lot of awesome parts. And so how do you make sure that all those parts are at the table? Then there's, I think, geographic diversity, right? I think it's easy for folks to say, like, if we're not getting together at Wynwood, then it's just not an event worth going to. Like, that's ridiculous, right? There's awesome talent throughout the city, north, east, kind of south and west. And so really thinking about where you're hosting, where you're pulling from. FIU has an amazing kind of student engineering group called UPE. They're freaking wild. Love them. And love what they're doing, but they're at FIU's kind of campus, right? That's not near Wynwood, and so making sure we meet people where they're at, not only physically but also in life, is important. I think the other part of diversity that we're really kind of trying to be attentive to is kind of ideological diversity, and that is to say, it's incredibly kind of complex and polarized time for our country. The nuances of that in Miami are particularly interesting because you have the political filter, plus the country of origin filter, plus the kind of ethnic cultural background. Like, there's a lot of things in Arroz con Mango, right, in Spanish that's happening there. And it's like you have some really interesting mixes. Like the Hispanic kind of voting bloc in Miami doesn't generally vote in the same way that other ones might in other parts of the country, right? So like, Miami is unique in that way. Are all the voices at the table? It's important. Like, if 30-40% of community believes X, and just because somebody doesn't think it's comfortable. Like, no, I think that's the whole point. Let's make sure that we're having conversations with the whole of Miami, even if it is something that we individually may or may not subscribe to. We will be better for it. We as a community will be better for it, and we as individuals will be better for it. That has to also translate to kind of the startup ecosystem, right? Diversity of thought, diversity of approach, diversity of experience is critical to building better products. If we believe that's important for building better products, it's also true for building better communities and better ecosystems. So without a doubt, this is it's not even kind of a pillar, right? It's not like, oh, diversity is a side dish. No, it's like it's the lens through which you have to look at everything, right? Everything through every kind of grant that we write or investment we make or whatever it might be, we're always asking ourselves, who is at the table? Does this look like a community? And are the people that are leading this, do they have like a special secret sauce that allows them to serve the target kind of demographic because they understand, they're empathetic with the end user, whatever it might be, right? When we're building a product, right, we're building SaaS, like we talk about having empathy with the user. Like, do you really understand the user's pain point and frustration? So you're always kind of, I'm excited when I hear talk about like the real problem and pain point they had. So they're deeply empathetic. Is the same true for the folks that are building community, right? If you're building a startup support organization, do you deeply empathize with that founder, right? Because you were an entrepreneur at some point, or you are an entrepreneur still, so you know the high highs and the low lows. Do you have deep empathy with that entrepreneur because you've been there? So always looking for that kind of diversity of experience and thought.
Oh, that's super interesting, particularly, because as you know, Latin America is very diverse. I mean, culturally, geographically, racially, et cetera. Given that, many of the people who are listening today are people in Latin America thinking about maybe moving to Miami. One of the reasons I got so deeply involved in, trying to support credible and robust tech ecosystem in Miami was I happened to be there when it just sprang up almost, with almost, no support, just completely organically in the late 90s. Basically, what happened at Patagon and with Mercado Libre, UP, Star Media, et cetera, is basically every company that raised over $5 million back when, that was a lot of money, moved to Miami. And it was, Silicon Beach on Lincoln Road. It was, real, sort of cluster. It was almost like the Diamond District. It was a tech district. And, unfortunately, what, the waves brought in, the waves took out. And then in 2000, most of those companies went under, retrenched, like Mercado Libre, back to Argentina. And in the second wave, most entrepreneurs in 2008 onward from Latin America who raised, say, $10, $15 million ended up going to Brazil. Miami was either caught flat-footed or it just was out of favor, or I think, because of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Brazil was sort of on everyone's mind. And if you were an entrepreneur in Chile and in Argentina, et cetera, you went to Brazil. That's begun to change, right? I mean, we're beginning to see, with the success case of Open English, raising $130 plus million here, you've begun to really see that change. From your perspective, I guess, two questions. One, what, if anything, are you guys doing to sort of, make sure that not only, people coming from tech in the United States when they land in Miami feel like there's a community? What are we doing to, make the entrepreneurs settling into Miami to grow their business regionally or in the United States feel comfortable? Well, let's start with that. Then I'll ask the follow-up question.
Yeah, and I'm curious to get your thoughts as well in terms of where you think there's opportunity.
Yeah.
You're really active in the region. I think of this in terms of like welcome committees, right? When I'm new to a place, like who's doing the welcoming, who's doing the orientation, and in Miami, I think there's obviously a lot going on. There's kind of maybe a little bit too much noise at times, and so who's your Sherpa in some ways? Who's your guide who really knows the ins and outs and who knows, Mira, this is the path I would recommend taking, or these paths, and this one over here probably going to be a distraction for you. Low value, high effort. Maybe you don't do that right away, right? So I think that kind of just having someone who's honest about where the opportunity is, where the real value is in town, is incredibly helpful. And so I think things like 500 Startups, CIC has the Latin American Soft Landing program. These places that are easily discoverable. So 500 is a global brand, highly known, highly recognized, right? By default, they're the welcome committee, right? So is CIC, right? By default, a lot of these pockets, or a lot of these kind of communities or the programs serve as the first point of contact with folks. And we're really looking to them to say, oh yeah, like, help us out in making sure that folks are oriented kind of in a good way. So when I'm thinking of how do we attract folks, I think the ethos of the city in and of itself attracts people, right? Miami has been for some time the place where Latin America meets, right? It might not be the capital of the region, but it's definitely where we meet. And so I think, all right, that's an asset. Let's leverage that. That's the attraction piece. I think the retention piece is different. It goes back to what we were talking about before. I think it's community. Why does an entrepreneur from Latin America stay? I think it's because she found community. She found tribe, she found squad, she found peers who made her better, right? And who she felt she could build companies with. She found capital, talent, but she also found peers. And that's where we're really doubling down in this area. All right, Miami seems to be holding its own and doing relatively well in terms of attracting a certain kind of person. It's at least piquing their interest. They're at least like looking at the city and considering it, right? Yeah. Are they staying? All right, I think that's where we got to do some work. Just based on kind of what we've heard and what we've seen in the community, it feels like where we got to go next is a retention piece and really make sure that the social infrastructure for keeping people here vis-a-vis community, vis-a-vis peers, that's where I think there's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I've just met, just even in this quarantine, just some amazing people. Yeah. And just what you say, I mean, they're the kinds of people that, travel all the time, but, they are interested in Miami as a home base. But I think what often happens with those people is after 4 or 5 years, they haven't built enough relationships down here. And those, since they don't have very deep roots because, they have a small social network, et cetera, but not a lot of business, your relationships down here, the roots are very shallow. And then, they may end up, going back to LA or, spending more time in Europe and giving up the house in Miami, et cetera. I got to say, I've always, as I drive around Miami, and this is one of the things, at Miami Angels AGP, which you headed up, I always, look at all those big houses on the water and thought to myself, if we could get those people to spend 10%, invest 10% of what they're spending on fuel for their planes and yachts a year, Miami would be the most robust, angel investing tech ecosystem probably in the world, or maybe second or third behind, Israel and Silicon Valley. So I just, I'm very passionate also about how do we, those people are coming. And I mean, I think with what's happening in New York, et cetera, more of them are going to be coming in the next, 6 months to a year. And I think, for me, the most important thing is getting those people connected, even connected amongst each other. What I'm always surprised is the number of times, like, I have 10, 15 people together, mainly because I'm just trying to create some connections. And then, I realize half of these people already know each other. They just didn't realize that they were in Miami at the same time, spending more time here. And so,
100%.
Yeah, just even, building. I mean, it's interesting. Endeavor's built, in some of their markets, sort of this somewhat self-promoting, sort of showing, Endeavor's connection and how, so many people have, sort of the spider web of connections that have, with Endeavor sort of in the middle. And I've never been interested in that role. But what I'm always am thinking is with some of these people who come to Miami, that they can be like, the super colonizers. They have a huge amount of credibility. If you can, in the good sense of the word, infect, one or two or three of them with the Miami bug, and they start proselytizing to their friends who are arriving, those people have, I think, the maximum credibility.
Totally, man. I think that's exactly it. I think that's actually what's happening, right? Anyway, so there's a few folks that are down here now that moved from New York last year, and when you speak with them, they're very successful in their own careers and in their companies. They're coming down. They are respectively in their companies the first kind of like senior partner,
right,
in Miami, out of the Miami office. The Miami office existed, but this is the first time the Miami office has someone of that stature. Like the stories are always very kind of like, we decided it was a time for a change, or very general things. Like cool. Let's get into under the real reasons why you came. There's obviously kind of tax optimization reasons. There's different considerations. Let's lean into that, right? Like let's lean into the fact that people of that experience with that social network, right, and with that worldview want to be here, right? I'm totally for sharing the table and expanding the pie so that more of those folks can feel like this is their city as well. To your point that in 3 or 4 years they don't leave because they didn't find tribe. Will Weinrop, who we've touched on it a bit now, Will sends me a note maybe 5 months ago, right before the world kind of went haywire.
Right.
Like, hey, I met an amazing founder. She's down here from New York. Has been here for like 1.5 years and hasn't really found tribe. But Richard Lambden from Ecosystems introduced us, and she was great. And so I'd love for you to meet her. So Emma and I grabbed coffee, and kind of she tells me a story. Dude, she's been in Miami 18 months. Her husband's from here, and they came to Miami because his family was here. They had been in Singapore and Southeast Asia. She had built and sold a company in Southeast Asia. She had an exit, and she said, you know what? Let's do the weather and climate and kind of global feel of Singapore in the States. And Miami was the answer, not New York.
Right.
She ends up meeting Will Weinrop through Richard, who her husband knows from high school, at a wedding in China.
Oh my God.
She had to fly to the other side of the world to find a Miami guy who said, hey, I'm part of a forum of co-founders, early stage tech founders. You'd be interested. Let me introduce you to this guy who runs it. And then Will introduces it. So like, for me, it was like so kind of, it was like the perfect kind of metaphor for the challenges that founders in Miami have in particular, or anybody might have in the city, where like you have to go through a really kind of effort and a hard journey to find other awesome folks for some reason. And so whether it's to your point, like rediscovering that, hey, like you moved down from New York as well. Hey, I've been here for a year. Like that kind of connection is massively important to folks feeling like this is their home as well. And so anything that we can do, it's non-sexy, it's non-flashy, it's really piecemeal, right? You're kind of stitching one little stitch at a time to build this tapestry. So when you do it in the action, it doesn't give you the whole macro picture. Man, I think that is what community is made out of. I think those kind of links and ties are why people choose to stay and invest here. And why they would open up their pocketbook, right? To your point, like these folks that just moved down from New York last year that are senior partners, I don't think they're going to write a check within a few months. But I think within a year, if they found some really awesome folks, other great investors, and they get plugged into that community, all right, I'll make a couple bets in the city. And you start building familiarity and comfort that way. So I'm super bullish, man. I'm super bullish on the city. I think it's an awkward time. You touched on this before, but like I'm equally kind of distraught and heartbroken for my hometown,
right?
Especially for a lot of the folks in the city who either work in the cash economy or have different circumstances that doesn't allow them to access the aid they absolutely need. And so there's massive kind of human need on one side, and on the other side, it's kind of really just jarring personally. I think there's also a ton of opportunity. I think there's a ton of opportunity for Miami to kind of use this as a platform, as a kind of a pivot, as a launching point to kind of double down on the new Miami, on a Miami that does move in global ideas, on a Miami that is attracting globally relevant talent. And so I think there's this dichotomy and this kind of confluence of things that is really awkward and unsettling. And I think we got to lean into it. I think we can't choose one and the other. I think we do a disservice if we pick one over the other. We got to focus on the whole and recognize the whole. But as it relates to kind of startups and ecosystem and venture in the city, I think there's a ton of opportunity in the next 5, 6, 7 years.
No, I totally agree. I mean, because at the end of the day, Miami's, a handful of cities in the United States where the quality of life is amazing. I mean, quite honestly, Boulder, I mean, if you think about it, in the 2000s, I mean, tech hubs in the US were essentially, Silicon Valley. Then you had Boston for nanotech and biotech, and then New York, because of Fred Wilson and a few people, was obviously on the map the way New York is on the map. It wasn't, sort of a leader. And then, for me, with Brad Feld in Boulder, focusing on green tech, et cetera, and Austin, thanks to South by Southwest, I remember, talking, with the Knight Foundation, et cetera, saying, listen, I mean, the good news is those guys have been the pioneers, those cities, and they've sort of shown a path on how you build a community and create a vibrant tech ecosystem. And so, my perspective, I totally agree. I mean, the scale of the human suffering is tremendous. It's been, less dramatic here than, say, in New York, but still super dramatic and important. But I mean, my bet is, Boulder, Austin, Miami end up in terms of tech hubs, being very favorecido, being, favored in just the sense of people wanting to live here and being able to continue to work. But I agree. I mean, the important thing is how do we help those people end up creating real roots here so they want to stay, and from my perspective is, those people, all of us, want to do more. I mean, it was my selfish reason for getting so involved. I had three daughters, at the time, maybe 12, 9, and 6. And I thought, shit, I don't want them, leaving Miami to chase opportunities and never feeling they can come back because there isn't enough for them to do if they don't want to, go into private banking or be a real estate agent. Right. I mean, that was really what I was thinking. Yeah. And I said, hey, let's try to, create something here where it didn't exist. What's interesting to me in terms of the other opportunity, thinking about, people coming from Latin America, that people don't focus on as much in Latin America is, I always point out hey, Miami, we have as much tech or venture activity and dollars invested as, all of Latin America did in 2018, including Brazil. But in terms of the U.S. Hispanic market, which for some companies in Latin America is sort of the point of the spear, instead of going into, if you're in Mexico, maybe instead of looking south, you look north. The Hispanic market is $1.5 trillion in 2018. To put that in perspective, Mexico's whole economy was 1.2 trillion. So the U.S. Hispanic market is a larger market than all of Mexico. It's triple the size of Argentina, and it's only, 20-30% smaller than Brazil. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, is that, I know the Knight you mentioned, is active in, I think you said 26 communities?
6 cities, including
cities. Yeah. But Miami is obviously, where it's based, and as in one of the key cities. Do you guys, do anything around, trying to build awareness in terms of the size of the U.S. Hispanic market and play in that sort of sandbox?
I think some folks definitely have that orientation, right? It's like CFP has a kind of an orientation where, like, they have an outpost in Miami, and that kind of then looks at the Americas, South America.
Got it.
And then kind of also funnels back north. I think that's, you see it kind of built in kind of the marketing and advertising presence Miami has. Miami has an outsized kind of advertising kind of community and industry sector because of so many kind of U.S. Hispanic accounts being housed out of here, right? And so there's an interesting kind of corollary there, I think, to think about kind of when I'm building a product and I'm pulling kind of talent and understanding, like, some folks are building products specifically for the U.S. Hispanic market, and even within that, there's like different generations, and you can kind of play around with it. And then other folks are saying, I want to understand U.S. Hispanic and how my product can be of interest and value to them. But my product is really Gen Pop, right? It's
Got it.
Everybody, but Miami can still kind of pull in. So, like, there's this, I think there's this intersection that we haven't fully explored, which I'm curious to kind of dive into. And speaking with some of the universities in town about it, like, I'd be really curious, man, in the next kind of few years, if any of the universities in town decide, hey, we're going to start giving away but awarding bachelor's degrees in either kind of growth or in product, that kind of stuff. And you're pulling in different experiences. Like, I think you can pull in somebody who's got some advertising background and do like a 2-year, even 1-year kind of master's in product and master's in growth that gives you that person's kind of advertising background. It gives you that person's Hispanic kind of Hispanic experience and worldview, and you kind of just upskill them a bit with some kind of basic stats and engineering to kind of be strong on the growth front. Like, that's a really interesting place. I don't think most places are thinking in those terms. And so if Miami's going to kind of, when I think of talent, I think we're going to import a lot of talent. I think that's really good. In terms of systemically pumping out talent that's relevant for the country and that would bring companies here, or at least outposts here, I think it's actually not a huge leap. I think definitely the engineering schools kind of in the long tail, got to kind of build those up. But there's so many things, man, that are part of these companies, the growth, the product management, all that stuff. It's a huge kind of element of this that I think Miami actually has a good kind of half foundation for, that we can kind of fill in the rest.
Hey, so one last question. I really appreciate you, taking the time today. I know you're
for sure
quite busy. In terms of people who, are coming to Miami, be it from, New York and other markets, relocating, or coming from Latin America, you've mentioned the CIC. What are the other sort of institutions, organizations that people should, think about connecting with, as in terms of, trying to find their community, finding their tribe?
Totally. If you're an investor or thinking of getting into the asset class of early stage venture, then Miami Angels is a great place to start. There's also Kane Angels Network, which is a affiliated angel group. There's Black Angels Miami, which just got off the ground.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it sounds great.
Kevin Cadet is heading it up. And then there's also something called Function.vc, which Monica Black is heading up, which is kind of an investor syndicate for family offices. And so in all these kind of those 4 entities, the general kind of premise is like, hey, we want to not only welcome you, but also give you a spiritual home for investing in the market. And in some cases, it might be really early. Like, you may be just toying with the idea of investing in the asset class. And this is meant to kind of help you along the journey. So give you a home to learn, experiment, play, and then build out kind of whatever. You can also kind of graduate within those organizations. Some entities are doing kind of larger round sizes, larger individual checks. some are doing smaller. So there's something for everyone there. So any of those would be great. If you're a founder, definitely recommend Local Leaders Collective with Will Weinberg.
Right. Sounds amazing.
The LLC. It's a founder forum, right? So groups, about, I think, 30, 40 folks in it now, but they're kind of segmented in groups of 8. And it's a peer group, ultimately, that gets together once a month just to support one another in their personal and professional kind of growth. And the idea behind it is that the folks that can best relate to founders and the high highs and low lows are other founders, right? And so having a community that's high trust, high fidelity, high confidentiality, where you can just kind of say, hey, this is what's happening, what's on the table, or how would you think about it? Or in your experience, how have you kind of approached growth? Those kinds of questions that maybe your spouse doesn't understand, even your board might not understand. I think that kind of home for founders is really important. So Will at the Local Leaders Collective is doing that. Alex Nucci is also doing that, something called Craftsperson. So craftsperson.org is like a syndicated group of founders that are syndicating their learning, right? And so every month they vote on bringing in one kind of masterclass expert to do something tactical. And so this week it might be how we did XYZ, how you went from 30 to 300 employees or whatever, but less inspiration capital and more actual tactical, how you grew certain things. So craftspeople.org is another great one.
We'll include all these in the show notes.
Cool. And I think I'll also throw out a couple others. So 500 Startups is in town. Obviously, Endeavor is in town and doing great stuff with high impact companies. You've got Venture Cafe Miami, which is an awesome kind of sorting hat where anybody can come in and find kind of what part of Miami is best suited for them. Come one, come all, super welcoming kind of space there. And so I think those are just a few. I'll send you a bunch that we can include in the notes for the podcast. But that's I think and kind of thinking kind of back, we talked about Matt at the beginning, kind of one of the kind of genius things that Matt did was to make sure that the market was saturated with enough on-ramps. When somebody came to Miami, it wasn't like there was one thing, and if you didn't find that one thing, you were out. Rather, there's so many touch points, right? So many ways that you could approach it, and kind of an on-ramp, almost like to the highway, that there's pretty much something for everyone, right? You can find something that meets you where you're at in your journey as an entrepreneur, an investor, someone who wants to be in venture in terms of building companies. And so I think that's a testament to kind of his work and his vision of saying we need to have something that's general, right? A lot of access points for Miami. So I think that's something that Miami does have kind of a really kind of good kind of strength and foundation on. Like you can plug in through a bunch of different doors.
Raul, hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. You guys are doing amazing stuff.
Thank you. Likewise.
And I look forward to giving you a real hug soon when this craziness is over and not just sending you a virtual hug.
Hopefully. Be
Great.
well.
Thanks a lot, buddy.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG.law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.